Hi, I'm Dr. Keshav Malhotra. I'm the director of Rainbow IVF Agra, also the director of Malhotra Embryology Training Academy. I'm currently the co-chair of SIG Embryology for Aspire and the second vice chair of embryology for ISAR. Today we are talking about a very important topic in our field, and that is preventing cryostorage failure. We know from recent news articles that a huge clinic in the US actually faced a loss of almost 4,000 eggs and embryos, which resulted from a cryostorage failure. Now, such an incident in any IVF clinic is equal to catastrophe. It can result in multiple lawsuits, which can run in millions and millions of dollars. And it also results in loss of precious embryos for patients who might have those embryos as the only opportunity for them to conceive. And that's something that I don't think any ART clinic can afford. So, how do we basically prevent cryostorage failures? So, before we go in that direction, we have to understand that there was a recent survey. This is not as recent, this was 2008, where clinics in the UK looked at number of clinics facing cryostorage failure, and it was reported that almost 11% of industry participants actually had some form of cryostorage failure happening with them. And if you looked at the results in more detail, 8% of the respondents actually had a failure of liquid nitrogen dry shippers or manual filling dewars. And this 8%, even though it feels small, is a huge number as far as our industry is concerned, because even if there is one case that gets lost, or if one case suffers because of such a damage, it can actually tarnish the whole industry as such. And that's something that we are basically looking at in India, where one small incident can actually result in widespread image issues as far as the technology is concerned. So there are lots of concerns about cryostorage, and if you broadly classify these concerns, they can be in the form of administrative concerns, where you don't have the proper documentation, consents, or you've not kept the records properly. It could be because of storage tanks as such, where either you have contamination issues or there is a failure of liquid nitrogen as such, the holding time is reduced, and sometimes even the location and the units, especially in terms of emergencies, like in case of a fire or an earthquake or a natural calamity, those could have important implications on cryostorage. It could also be because of maintenance issues, where tank filling, refilling, monitoring of the tanks can result in issues. It could be sample management and inventory management, and it could also be direct injury to the personnel who's handling the cryostorage. So lots of issues to actually worry about. When we talk about cryostorage, we have to understand that it's of different varieties. You have the most common one is the liquid nitrogen storage tanks, where we are directly storing samples within liquid nitrogen. You have the next generation vapor storage systems as well, where we are storing the samples or embryos or eggs in liquid nitrogen vapors. And you also have electric freezers that are there. Now, each has its pros and cons, and that's something that we have to consider when we are buying the storage tank itself. But the commonest and the most easiest to maintain is a liquid nitrogen storage tank. Now, these liquid nitrogen storage tanks also come in various capacities. They can be as low as 5 liters to as high as 500 liters. And again, understanding the operation of each and every tank for each and every volume is important. Also doing a physical inspection of the tank to notice for any dents or cracks within the surface, and the static holding time, which is the amount of time that the tank can actually store and hold liquid nitrogen for. That's also an important thing to consider before you start using that tank actively. Now, a lot of this has been mentioned earlier on in the series, where I think Dr. Kersey has spoken about cryostorage tanks. So I'm not going to go into the details of what a tank looks like and what it's made up of, but only things that we need to understand is that once the tank fails, there are only minutes that the clinic has to avoid catastrophe. And this was proved by an experiment that was done by Shivani itself, where they actually installed probes on the inside of the cryotank and also on the surface of the cryotank, and they induced a manual hole inside the cryotank itself so that the vacuum breaks, and then calculated that the time that was available for the embryologist to actually like change the tank or take action. And the conclusions from this experiment were that the outside tank temperature drops instantly, and that's a very early sign of cryotank failure. So whatever equipment that you're using or whatever alarm system that you're using, it should have an outside temperature probe, because that will give you an early warning. And we have to understand that apart from the temperature probe inside, you also have to have a level sensing probe inside the liquid nitrogen tank, because even if the level drops, the temperature inside the tank will take some time to drop, because the vapors are still maintaining some amount of temperature. And this is the crucial period that you have where you can actually change the tank and save whatever embryos or whatever gametes you have in that storage tank. So based on this experiment, there are a lot of considerations that are there for embryology laboratories. Now I'll start right from the point of administration or the documents. So consents are very important, and you have to devise your consents in such a way that it looks after the increasing number of samples that you have in your cryostorage, the amount of space that you have in your cryostorage, and also long-term agreements with your patients. ASRM recommends that storage agreements are necessary, and basically covers 6 points where you want to look at embryo disposal under various life situations. Let's say if there's a divorce or if there's a death of a partner, what do you want to do with the embryos in that situation? An agreement to maintain contact with the facility is important. Payment of storage fees is important. Negotiating a new storage agreement. Updating current contact information. And what happens if there is a failure to respond to any of the communication that the lab has made? What do you do in that situation? So keep in consideration all of these points and design your consents accordingly. All of the records have to be complete. All of the records have to have traceability, have to have identification markers. At least 3 identification markers have to be there for the patient's identity. But whenever we're maintaining cryostorage, ensuring the color of the device, that you're keeping a record of the color of the device, color of the goblet, how many embryos were stored on that device. All of these are crucial points in order to ensure that the inventory is maintained. Please ensure that duplication of these records don't happen, but always keep a hard copy document as well as a soft copy. Have double witnessing at each and every step of cryopreservation, and that can help you in reducing a lot of errors. Data labeling is crucial. Now, a lot of people would just use marker pens to label. Now, these marker pens should be liquid nitrogen sensitive and should not vanish with liquid nitrogen. A good modality to incorporate here is barcodes or printed labels, which are again liquid nitrogen tested and liquid nitrogen safe, and that could actually help you in incorporating a lot of information on that label without trying to fit in the name of the patient or the husband's name or the number of embryos on that particular device. So that's something that you can consider. As far as the cryo storage tank is considered, finding the right capacity tank for your clinic is important. Ensuring that your clinic has adequate number of tanks is also important. So let's say you're running a normal IVF center. According to the new laws, now you would want 1 tank for your embryos, 1 tank for your infected samples, 1 tank for sperm samples, 1 more tank for refilling. So at least a minimum 4 cryo tanks should be ensured within your laboratory. Again, look at the location of these units, look at how you're maintaining and monitoring these units, what is the temperature of the room that has all of these cryo tanks in it. Always try and put an oxygen sensor within that cryo storage room, because once liquid nitrogen leaks, we have to understand that it expands 300 times. So 1 liter of liquid nitrogen will form 300 liters of nitrogen gas. Now imagine if you have a 100-liter tank and that leaks out, that's forming 30,000 liters of gas, which is quite a bit. Now if you are in a small room, let's say you're in a 4 by 10 room, that will displace all of the oxygen from within the room, can lead to hypoxia, can lead to anoxia, and therefore having an oxygen sensor is crucial for the welfare of the embryologist. Please have an emergency plan in place, and an emergency plan has to be devised not just for fires, earthquakes or natural calamities. It also has to be devised for failure of the cryotank. So what you can do is have backups of cryotanks available at you at any given point of time, or have alarm systems that would warn you for any such catastrophe, and have a designated person who would react to that emergency, because an emergency can happen at any given point of time. It could be in the middle of the night as well. So if there is a staff which is stationed in the hospital in the middle of the night, that staff should be trained to save those embryos or gametes or save that cryotank as well. So that's again something that I would want you to consider. Manual monitoring is something that all of us do, and I think manual monitoring should be done daily. So you can use a wooden ruler and just dip it into liquid nitrogen. Once you take it out, the level of nitrogen will fog that wooden ruler, and you will be able to calculate the depth of the liquid nitrogen or the level of liquid nitrogen within the tank itself. Now, once you're doing it on a daily basis, you will be able to time your refilling properly, and that will result in basically ensuring that the life of the cryotank is maintained, the levels of the liquid nitrogen are maintained, and it also ensures the safety of the tank itself. Now, whenever we have monitoring issues, we would want to look at a few things. We want to look at leaks, we want to look at ice formation, we want to look at frost formation, if there's any sweating or evaporation on the cryotank surface, and if there are any sounds that the cryotank is making. So all of these have to be identified, because all of these could be early markers for cryotank failure. Always understand that the personnel or the embryologist who's handling the liquid nitrogen tank has to be trained in liquid nitrogen handling, has to wear the proper protective gear for liquid nitrogen handling, which includes gloves, liners, protective eyewear, and also an apron, and also has to wear covered shoes as well. Now, there are a lot of remote monitoring systems that can be placed. Now, you have internal monitoring systems and you have external monitoring systems. Internal monitoring systems basically will give you a continuous monitoring of the temperature of the liquid nitrogen tank inside, and also will give you level sensors or the levels that the tank is maintaining. And when you look at external monitoring systems, you basically can have real-time or time-lapse monitoring systems which take the surface temperature, and you can also put surface sensors as well. So these are a few monitoring systems that are available in the market. Now, most of these alarm systems will give you either a telephone or an email or an SMS based trigger, and if there is no action that's happening, obviously the alarm will repeat at a set duration. So that's something that you can configure for your laboratories as need be. So once an alarm is set off, you have to actually ensure that there's a proper SOP in place which guides the embryologist or guides the staff for the next steps. Like I mentioned, an emergency can happen at any given point of time. So each and every staff that is associated within the clinic or is located in the clinic at that point of time should know what is the next step that needs to be done. And again, it's important for us to understand, especially during the off hours or evening hours or night hours, who is that staff that will be responsible for carrying out this SOP that needs to be determined. Now, it's not just your cryotanks that can fail. You can also have failure of your refrigerators, failure of your pharmaceutical like drug storage equipments, etc. And here also you would want to ensure that temperature measurement is done on a constant basis, so that you're maintaining a 2 to 8 degree temperature, which is conducive for the injectable as well as for the media that you're storing. Now, do understand that whenever an alarm is triggered, the clinic should be able to contact the patient, should ensure that traceability, accountability has been maintained, should ensure that you have spoken to the patient about all the necessary steps that have been taken, and the patient knows about each and everything that has happened. If you're ensuring transparency within your clinic, that will actually help you in avoiding a lot of legal lawsuits. And if you're also in your consents incorporating the fact that mechanical failure can still occur, that can also safeguard you quite a bit. So again, last few things that we want to discuss now. This is again something that Shivani did with consideration from all different embryologists within the country, and they tried to basically find out the worth of a cryotank. Now, whenever we are storing a sample, it probably has consumed about 1 lakh rupees worth of medicines, hormones, consumables, media, etc., which is to the tune of about 2000 US dollars. One sample would have taken approximately 15 to 20 hours of the time of the clinician, about 10 hours of the time of the embryologist. Indirect resources would add up to about 25,000 rupees or 500 US dollars. So approximately one sample within a cryotank is, let's say, worth about 1.5 lakh rupees. But there are hundreds and thousands of samples, especially in big cryotanks. So that particular cryotank can actually go up to being worth crores. 1.5 crores is what a lot of people are estimating. But if there is a single lawsuit or a single failure that happens within that cryotank, you lose out on all of this money, and the lawsuit can result in millions and millions of dollars of legal fees. So that's again something that we have to consider, and therefore I basically feel that a cryotank is priceless. And whenever we're thinking of ensuring cryostorage safety, always following manufacturers' guidelines on replacing the cryotanks and maintaining the cryotanks is absolutely crucial. If your cryotanks are working properly, don't just assume that they will continue to work properly for the rest of your life. Always ensure that you get them tested, get them cleaned, and you replace them at certain intervals. And if you're ensuring that, definitely you'll be able to manage your cryostorage in a much better fashion. I would emphasize again that documentation and consents are crucial, and putting in anything and everything that can happen, all the risks that are associated with cryostorage, if they are mentioned in your consents, that can really safeguard you quite a bit. So with this, thank you so much for listening. Hope you had some information that you could derive from this lecture. If you have any questions regarding this topic, do shoot an email to me at drkeshamlothra@gmail.com or shoot an email to Shivani Scientific, and we'll be happy to answer your queries. Thank you so much.